What's up, guys? So what this is this, okay? So I watched the movie Superman 2025 for the second time on HBO Max. I saw it for the first time in theaters. So what I did the second time around is I took some notes as I was watching it. So inshallah, I'm going to be talking about my notes, and then you guys will be able to, inshallah, take some benefit from those notes. Hopefully we can all learn and benefit from the notes that I took. So the movie starts with this like sequence of 3333. So 3 centuries ago, metahumans first appeared on the earth in this era of like gods and monsters, which is what they're calling this new chapter, this first section of the DCU movies, Gods and Monsters. A little blasphemous, but creative liberty, I guess. Second part is 3 decades ago, Superman arrived. So we find out that he's about 30 years old in the movie, more or less. 3 years ago, Superman announces himself to the world. So 3 years ago, he is Superman. So maybe when he's like 27, we can say. 3 weeks ago, Superman stops an attempt from a country called Bavaria. He stops in a Bavarian invasion of Jarhanpur, an attempt of that. And by the way, this suffix pur, it's very much like a Indian suffix or Persian. So automatically we know where the writer, the director's heads are at. Like, to me, this looks a lot like conflicts in that area of the world, like in South Asia, Kashmir, or in the Middle East, Palestine. So this is a colonial entity trying to invade a non-aggressor here, or an indigenous population, Jarhanpur. Although in the movie it takes place in Eastern Europe, but I'm just telling you that suffix pur is very much South Asian. You might have heard of like Dhonapur, for example. Pur, it's a suffix at the end of cities, just like Abad, like Shahjahanabad, Islamabad. These are like Persianate Indian suffixes for the end of places. But anyway, 3 hours ago, there's something called the Hammer of Boravia, which is like supervillain, which we find out later in the movie is a clone of Superman created by Lex Luthor. 3 minutes ago, Superman faces his first ever defeat. And if I remember correctly, that is to Ultraman, which I think is the Hammer of Boravia. I think they're one and the same thing. Not sure, but I think so. So that's the beginning of the movie. It starts in that 3333 type of format. But what's unique about this movie is, first you have to understand this about Superman, okay? Superman is the all-American superhero. He grew up in Kansas City, kind of like I did, for part of my life. I spent the first 5 years of my life, maybe 6, were in Kansas City, Missouri. So Superman grew up in Kansas. Did I say Kansas City? I don't know if that's confirmed. He was definitely in Kansas, but I don't know if Superman was in Kansas City. That was me. But Superman grew up in Kansas, rural Kansas, on a farm. And he's like the all-American superhero. His colors are like red and blue, and then instead of white, it's yellow. And his what's his saying? His saying is truth, justice, and the American way. There is not a more American superhero than Superman. But what's unique about this movie is that they they present him as an immigrant, which is really like what everyone is who's in this country. Nobody just started from here, right? The Native Americans, who were the first people here, they came from, the Bering Strait, I believe it was called, between Alaska and Russia. The people of African descent here came from Africa, of course. They were brought initially as slaves. 1/3 of those were Muslims. The white people, the Europeans, I should say. The Europeans, initially there was Leif Erikson and Scandinavian exploration. The Vikings, they traveled westward. There are some who say some scholars think that Africa reached America through, Mansa Musa's kingdom, the Mali Empire, I believe it was, West Africa. I talked about the Europeans. Other waves of Europeans came later in like 1600s, 1300s, maybe not 1300s, but right, like for religious pilgrimage, the pilgrims came for religious freedom, people came for religious freedom. So everyone came here from somewhere. America, I'm talking about. But this movie really straight up presents Superman as an immigrant, which was very unique. And it doesn't just present Superman as an immigrant, because historically, Superman has been presented as an alien. This movie presents Superman as a human. Not literally. We know he doesn't have the human genome. He's a Kryptonian. He's from Krypton. But this movie presents the idea that humanity is more than having the human genome. It's like having humanity. And we say that Superman has that. So that's what's unique about this movie. It presents the all-American superhero, Superman, all-American and alien. It presents him as immigrant and human. To say that being those second two things does not mean you can't be those first two things. That second pair, being that second pair, doesn't mean you can't be that first. That's the point this movie makes. So the movie introduces his audio with his parents as he's sent to do good and live out Krypton's truth. We see phrases in the movie like alien and illegal aliens. And we see Lex Luthor. So now let's look at what Lex Luthor is. Lex Luthor is very smart, very wealthy, and he's mortal. He's a human being in the sense that he's immortal. He's not an alien like Superman. And Superman is mortal too. Of course, he can die. So I don't know why I wrote mortal in my notebook. Maybe I wanted to specify like he's more vulnerable than a Kryptonian per se. He's a human being, weak. He's a rich billionaire tampering in politics. So that can be, compared to a lot of people. We can start off with Crassus from ancient Rome. Crassus was not like a billionaire per se, but he was a wealthy individual involved in politics. Today, who do I think Lex Luthor is close to from the movie? I would compare him to a Peter Thiel, right? Palantir, Israel, Palestine. So Peter Thiel or Elon Musk, those are who I think Lex Luthor could be in the Superman movie. And then I wrote Hammer of Boravia. That's very similar to right? Lex Luthor technology being used to colonize the people in Jarhanpur. That's very similar to Palantir being used to harm the Palestinians by the Israeli Offense Forces, the IOF. I wrote down in quotations because, this was crazy, by the way. The Prime Minister of Boravia in the movie, I quote him. He said, the United States will continue to feel the wrath, and then goes on and on. So this is a ally of the U.S. explicitly threatening the U.S. The leader of a country allied with the U.S. is threatening the U.S. And by the way, I have to say, the Prime Minister of Boravia, he looked just like Benjamin Milikowski. He looked a lot like Milikowski. So that's also very explicitly implied there. And then what this movie also gets at is that Superman is Superman. Super comes from the Latin word super, which means like above or higher. And then Ultraman is like, it's super and ultra. They both mean like greater than a human. So they're both greater than a human being in terms of power. So it's a mirror type of thing. Ultraman, you could say, is the foil of Superman, but really I would say that's Lex Luthor. So Superman, Ultraman, the movie introduces this idea of meta-humans. What does meta mean? Meta means beyond. So beyond human beings. This movie keeps talking about this concept of beyond a human being. What is that? A Superman, an Ultraman, a meta-human, greater than what we all are. What is that? So, and I think this is really tied to and really inspired from Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch. So if you don't know about that, go read about that, the Übermensch. Like Nietzsche said that God was dead and man had to rise up to be something greater and stronger and better than man. The Ubermensch is like just better than a man. What that means is like imagine the different dimensions of human beings: intelligence, spirituality, strength, resilience, capability of learning languages. You can add anything. Dimensions of human beings: height, strength, weight, and just Ubermensch is like increase that, make it better. So a better human being. But I can't bring up Nietzsche's Ubermensch without bringing up Iqbal's Khudi. Iqbal was the philosopher poet of Pakistan. Before Pakistan, he was born in the British Raj, but he was a poet of the East, and he emphasized this idea. He disagreed with Nietzsche's Ubermensch because Nietzsche predicated that on the idea that God was dead. Iqbal aptly knew that God was ever living. God does not die. So he said Khudi. The Ubermensch is not a thing. There's no Ubermensch because you need God. You can't be without God. So in the sense that God created everything. So the Khudi is that man does not become greater by rising above himself. Man becomes greater in seeking closeness to God. So the closer you are to God, the more righteous you are, the more intelligent you are, right? Because the closer you are to attributes of God, even though it will never be the same because it's incomparable, but the closer you are, for example, God is the most just. So the closer you are to justice, God is the truth. The closer you are to truthhood, God is the most merciful. The more merciful you are, when you have these attributes, that's when you become greater and greater. That's when you become Khudi. So he rejects this idea of Ubermensch. He's saying you're going about it wrong. You have to pursue God in order to become the Ubermensch, which is the Khudi. So by the way, I told you, like I was writing in my notes, these notebooks, so it's going to be very sporadic. There's going to be a lot of tangents. So if this is not your style of video, click off now, but we're going to keep going, inshallah. So the movie talks about also how Superman is unelected. He's not an elected official, yet he meddles in international policy. For example, he stopped the Bavarian invasion of Jarhanpur, which, that's a very political thing to do. But in his mind, he's just saving lives. The Boravian leader looks like Milikowski. I already talked about that. In my notes, I wrote Netanyahu, but that's not his real name. Lex Luthor, Palantir, military weaponry. I made that comparison already. But I wanted to say is this. In the Iron Man movie, Marvel's Iron Man movie, Tony Stark is a very similar character to Lex Luthor, in the sense that they both own like high-tech weapon companies that are used against developing nations. But Lex Luthor is presented as a villain, or at least an anti-hero, and Tony Stark is presented as a protagonist and eventually a hero in the movie. So that's just interesting. I thought I'd bring it up. What else? Bavaria is... Oh yeah, I wrote Bavaria is an American ally. We're allied with a lot of countries that are colonizers. For example, France and Israel. Superman never said... Oh yeah, this was a key point. So Lois interviews Superman in the movie, and she's kind of grilling him. And it's meant for us, the audience, to think about these things too. Did Superman consult with the president? No, he didn't. But here's my point. He doesn't have to. Superman does not have to consult with the president. Superman never said he was a representative of the U.S. And he says to Lois, I didn't go representing the U.S. I went as a human being trying to protect life, innocent lives. So this gets at the debate or the conflict between nationalism and individuality. Are you a member of your nation, or are you your own person? Are you an American, or are you me? Like, am I me the American, or am I me the person? So that's what that's at. And same thing with Tony Stark and his Iron Man suit, right? Was he Tony Stark, the American businessman, or was he Tony Stark, the person? So this is what we have to separate. And in that argument, it's my opinion that the person wins. The individual is above the nation for that individual. And the nation is above the individual Actually, I don't even know. You could make the argument that the individual is above the nation, even for the nation, because the nation is made up of individuals. I haven't figured that out yet, so I'm not even going to talk about it. That's something I would need to think about. I haven't thought about it yet. But for the individual is more important than the nation in terms of like ability to do things. What I mean is Tony Stark absolutely had a right to fly his suit around, own his suit. It's his suit. He invented it. Superman absolutely had a right to stop the conflict in Bavaria. It's his bodily autonomy. If I want to move my hand this way, I can do that. The government can't tell me not to do that. That's absolutely ridiculous. So Superman had full authority to do whatever he did, in my opinion. Second thing, we notice about Superman in that interview that he's pretty conflict avoidant, very different from me, like opposite of me. He doesn't want to have the argument. He doesn't want to have the debate. He knows he's kind of being antagonized, so he runs away. He closes the door. Lois and him fight, and then they leave. I don't even consider that a fight. That was like an argument, you could say. But if I were in Superman's shoes in that situation, I would have defended myself in the way that I did, and I agree with what Superman did, 1000%. It's his individual freedom to stop the conflict in Bavaria and Jarhanpur. And then I also circled this. In the first half of the movie, or not necessarily half, but part, the first part of the movie, the voice message from his Kryptonian biological parents defines Superman's purpose. Hold on to that idea, we'll come back to it. The movie also presents humanity as normalness. Not the human genome, but normalness, like loving, fearing, laughing. Remember his speech at the end, I put one foot in front of the other without knowing all that stuff. That's humanity. That's what the movie is presenting as humanity. Okay, talked about that. We also learned Lex Luthor is a massive strategist. Very smart guy, strategic. He made a whole plan to break into the Fortress of Solitude, get the video, recover the video in its original form, slander or smear Superman in the media. Very, very smart, elaborate plan. So we also find out side characters, Justice Gang, Mr. T, Hawkgirl. Mr. T was cool, I liked him. Green Lantern. Interesting. Now, here we get to the meat of my video, inshallah. So what I'm talking about here is the Superman biological parents, the Kryptonians video is released in full, and it doesn't look good. It's talking about colonialism. And if you've studied The White Man's Burden, I don't like to colorize things like we often do, like white man's burden. No, there's nothing white about it, right? Like, it happened to be white people that did it, but it could have been black, could have been yellow, anyone. So I don't like the term like white man's burden, but that's what Kipling said. It was the white man's burden. Instead, I would say the colonizer's burden, because we're all human beings. We all have good in us and we all have evil in us.